I'll turn this over to Glenn. He's going to handle the rest of the meeting.
My name is Glenn Schultz. I'm chairman this year of the long-range planning effort. We've had basically 2 meetings so far. In November, a group of 35 leaders of almost all the volunteer groups in Great Falls met and brainstormed ideas that should be in long-range planning in this community. Then a couple of weeks ago, a core group from those got together and we put together a little outline of a draft long-range plan. Let me pass this around.
Very fast.
Yes.
And also, there's water back there if you start getting thirsty. I didn't realize where it was in the car seat.
What we're attempting to accomplish is to build a sort of a planning process so that all of the various groups in Great Falls that each have their own aspirations can come together and share those aspirations, and we can see how they all fit together and then work together towards building community consensus around as many of them as possible. So we're in the initial drafting stages for a document which we hope to put out for community comment possibly in April or May. We might have some little kiosks in a few places with copies and a little place where people could put their comments in, and then we'll see how it goes. One of the subcommittees of the Long Range Planning Committee is the sponsor of this meeting tonight, and that's the Wastewater Subcommittee. And I'll turn it over to John here in a minute. But I wanted to also make an announcement. There is another important community meeting tomorrow night at the library, and this is a meeting of the Great Falls Historical Society, and they typically have a speaker every month speaking about some aspect of Great Falls history. This particular meeting is going to be a talk by Reverend Roland Smith, who is the pastor at the Salem Baptist Church, almost to Seneca Road on Georgetown Pike. It was built in 1902. Part of that building was moved from the center of what was then Forestville down there, and the building is badly deteriorated. In fact, last winter with our heavy snow, part of the roof caved in and the building was condemned. So they have and want to share their hopes with the community tomorrow night of what their hopes are, and perhaps out of that some interest can come and they can achieve the goals of the church. But in any event, the historical aspects are of interest to people because it is the second oldest church in our community. Out of 8 churches, the only one older is built in 1890, and that's the Smith Chapel, also a little church. So without further preamble, let me introduce John Ulfelder as a member of the Wastewater Committee, and Jack Bowles is also here, and Wayne Foley. I see no others, but John is our relation with regard to zoning because of his knowledge, and so he would like to introduce our speakers for tonight.
Thanks, Glenn. This is the 4th in the series, and it relates to the issue of what could happen, or what do we have now, what could happen in the Great Falls Village area if you had sewer and people were not subject to some of the restrictions that apply when you have to depend on septic as your only alternative for dealing with your wastewater. And so we met with Ruth Carver, and Glenn and I met with some of the folks at the zoning administrator's office to talk about doing some preliminary analysis for us, as it says on land use density analysis here in the village center area, to give us some feel for what we have and what we could have. I would just add a point that it's not just a question of density, there's also a question of uses. One of the things that being dependent on septic does is it severely restricts some of the uses, high water types of uses in commercial area that you might otherwise have. So there are other aspects to it. It's not strictly a square footage issue on its own. But tonight we have with us Lori Kirst, who is deputy administrator in the office of, what do I say, right? Deputy zoning administrator in the office of the zoning administrator, right? And Jack Real, who is a senior staffer there. And we also have with us tonight Aaron Kilbaner, who is in the planning division, but he's here primarily for any questions or issues that come up in connection with the comprehensive plan and how it operates in this same area, because it has a great deal to say about the village center and its uses, along with the actual zoning. So what we'll do is we'll have their presentation and we'll open it up for questions based on their presentation and see what kind of issues that people want to get into as a result to address some of the issues they'll raise tonight. So, Jack?
Thank you, John and Glenn. Again, Jack Real with Zoning Administration. We've been asked to come here this evening to give you an overview primarily from a zoning perspective as to what the potential is for density, for change of development, increase in some areas of development within the commercial part of Great Falls. What you're going to see is the representation of the general landmass that represents the commercial district, if you will. It's not an official representation. It doesn't capture each and every lot, but it really is designed to give you a pretty good perspective on what is built currently within this part of Great Falls, and then there's a projection as to what possibly could be built. What I want to say up front, and I want to say this with as much emphasis as I possibly can, is that the way we've represented this is that we went in a very broad brush way. We looked at each individual lot within this area, which I'm going to give you a sense of the area through a series of maps, so you know you'll get your orientation will be in place. But we looked property by property to see what our records showed in the way of development as it currently stands. And then we looked at the comprehensive plan, which is something that's there for guidance under by right development, or it's there to allow for recommendations as to what should be developed for the area, what's preferred for the area. But I want to caution you very, very strongly that we have got basically two sets of numbers. We've got a representation of what's currently built, and then we have the idealized number which represents the greatest degree of development that could possibly occur. But in realistic terms, due to a whole series of regulations and requirements, that number realistically is not that high. It would be, in many cases, considerably lower. But rather than just throw out some generalizations or additional statements of qualification, we can address those very realistic and very important limitations that do in fact restrict development. We'll go by those one by one, and that'll be towards the end of the presentation. But just to get started, I want to show you the area that we're looking at. This is an air photo, and here's the Safeway Shopping Center and the Village Center here. We're in this building, the Grange, and I suspect everyone in this room is at least as familiar with this picture as I am. This is an important map. This is the same area, and it gives you the zoning for the various properties. So what I can tell you is there's quite a range of zoning. Everything from residential 1 dwelling unit per acre, R1, to RE, residential estate, where you can develop a house on 2 acres. And then you get into the series of commercial zones within this map. You have this one piece of C2, which basically designed for offices. And then you move into what is probably the bulk of the rest of the map, which is either C6 commercial zoning or C8. And it's a little bit difficult even for me to see from this map, but this hatched symbol here is a division between the C6 and the C8. And this green hatch is the delineation between the commercial and the residential up there. This is a representation, this is a land use map, which is used by the planning division. It just designates the use for this property. And as you can see, the park authority property over here, and then the public facilities where the library is located. And then beyond that, you've got residential uses all around the perimeter. And then this core area is a combination of commercial C6 and C8. I want to touch on the comprehensive plan just briefly. I think I started to mention, it's a guide for making decisions about land use and how the built area, the natural environment can be developed. And it's designed, and Aaron can speak to this perhaps if there's questions later, but it's really designed to allow for a prescribed orderly development of the county. It includes general policies and texts that regard land use and transportation. And keep in mind for proposals that include rezoning, special permits, special exceptions, all of those applications, those zoning applications, are viewed and evaluated in terms of conformance with the comprehensive plan. For this particular part of the county, for this commercial area of Great Falls, the land use has this specific guidance, this language. Commercial uses should be limited to existing commercial areas. Commercial uses in these areas should be neighborhood serving in nature and should be restricted to the existing commercially zoned parcels. Uses requiring special permits, special exception, should be rigorously reviewed and permitted when the use is of a size and scale that will not adversely impact adjacent land uses and low-density residential character of the area. So if you were to come in and you wanted to rezone, or you wanted to come in with a proposal for a use that requires a special exception approval, the plan language would be very, very important, because this would be the guidance, this would be the starting point. And if you wanted to go beyond this, then it would require that the comprehensive plan be amended before you could get to something above what this recommends. Now, in order to look at the commercial district, what we've done, just to make it a little bit more digestible, is we've split it into 4 sectors. They don't represent anything official. They're simply quadrants so that we can look a little bit more closely at the individual properties and give you an idea of how they're currently developed, and then start talking a little bit about how they could possibly be increased in density. Okay, this is the shopping center property. Here, the southeast quadrant of the Walker Road, Georgetown Pike intersection. It has 3 different zoning categories on it. It's got C8, it's got C6, and then some of it over here, this is zone residential, so R1. And in fact, there was a special exception approval to allow for parking, to allow for the amount of parking that's required for this development. The next slide is going to give us some details about that quadrant. As I said, it includes all those lots. It includes the two C district zonings and the R1. The total land area that was represented on that last slide is over 500,000 square feet. The current development, and this is from our records, and I want to again qualify some of these numbers. We believe this to be very accurate as to the current development. This is from site plans that have been approved. This is a figure that we believe is accurate in terms of what is built within that quadrant that was shown on the previous map. Now here's where I want to re-emphasize the point I made when I started. The maximum by right development, if you were to take that land area and simply apply the number that you multiply to get the floor area ratio, or the maximum amount of square footage that you can develop on the site, you would actually come up with this number. And that number represents a certain percentage of the property which is zone R1. So there's a multiplier for that zoning that gives you a certain number, and it's a 0.15. In the C6, you're allowed to develop at a floor area ratio of 0.40. So that portion was multiplied times 0.4. And then the rest of it was C8, and that multiplier is 0.50. So if you take the land area by itself and you fully ignore all of the issues that one would have to address to build on that land, then idealistically you would come up with a number of 171,000 square feet of floor area that could potentially be built. But in reality, as I go through the checklist of items that you have to adhere to, I'll go through that at the end, that number is unrealistic. You'd be hard to achieve anything close to that with all of the site plan issues and the environmental issues in general that you'd have to address.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
When you say that, is that like the surface area, or would floor area be if there's 2 floors and it was 91,000 and you made a second?
Yeah, that's a good question. The gross floor area that's developed represents everything that under the zoning ordinance is deemed to be gross floor area. So it would involve not just the first floor, it would be a second floor, and if there were a third floor, it would involve that as well. And you add all of that up. So it isn't the footprint alone. The footprint figure is achieved here because you're talking about just land area, square footage. But whenever you're calculating a floor area ratio, you're looking at gross square footage on that land area, and you count everything that qualifies as gross square footage. Some parts of the building, an outside balcony or something, that perhaps wouldn't count as gross floor area, but everything within the building generally would.
If I might add, and I apologize if I'm going too elementary, but gross floor area, or FAR, floor area ratio, that's a ratio of building area to land area. And what's key about that number is you can either spread out the floor area or you could build up. But when we talk about building up, one thing Jack has not mentioned yet, there are other zoning regulations which limit the height of a building. And typically in the C6 and C8 districts, we're talking about a maximum building height of 40 feet. And if you equate that to stories, that's probably 3 stories at the most. And again, that's assuming a perfect world, which as we all know, the world isn't perfect. So.
Yeah, I'm glad Lori brought that up, because the zoning ordinance does have a restriction on building height, and that's a very important factor to keep in mind. In the C6 and C8, you're just not going to be able to build a tall building. It's just not allowed under the zoning district. Okay, moving in a clockwise fashion, we're now up to, or we're over to the southwestern quadrant, and this, of course, is the village center, unique to Great Falls in many ways. Here we've got also split zoning, and we've got residential zoning on this side. We've got these properties above here that face Georgetown Pike. They're split with the half of the property facing Georgetown Pike, zone C8, and the interior halves are zone C6. And you've got C6 zoning down through here. So again, the same to get a number which represents the existing built area. That's fairly simple. We've got records telling us what that is. This is just a list of, most of you are familiar with the properties and how they're developed, but this is kind of a list of what's over there. But to get to these numbers, the lot areas were pretty easy because we've got records, we've got GIS to confirm. The existing square footage for each of those properties, we know that generally from the site plans. Now, again, we've got numbers here representing a maximum by right build out. And again, just keep in mind, there's all sorts of restrictions that apply. These numbers are theoretical. They're the absolute maximum under the current zoning. So don't be too alarmed that they're quite different between the existing and what could be.
Jack, just curious, 746 Walker Road,
Yeah.
is existing is greater than the current by right?
Yes. We had a discussion about that earlier this evening, and the increase there beyond what would be permitted under the C6, which gives you 10,500 square feet, that represents 0.4 of that land area. It's increased because they're actually borrowing from the rest of the larger village center condo area. So to get that density on that piece of land, they took some density away from what existed on the rest of the property.
Okay.
But you can see there are a number of lots that that are, could be developed perhaps higher, but the number on the right is really a bit of a stretch in most cases. The northwest quadrant, a little different scenario here because you've got smaller lots, not so many that are together. This is, I guess, called Oliver's Corner. This piece in here. This is a property that is actually two different addresses, and this is generally all commercial through here, C8. And there's a couple of properties that really have some old buildings that are, probably good candidates for potential redevelopment.
And actually, a lot of those lots on the north side are split zone. The lots extend
Into
further
the
back.
residential.
It's split zoned between the commercial boundary and the and residential. So they each those lots have both on them, but they're restricted for commercial development, obviously, to the commercial portion of the lot.
Yeah, that's right. If you've got a property that's split zoned, it's kind of tricky in a lot of ways. But if you want to build a use that's allowed in a certain commercial district, it has to be fully on that portion of the lot that's zoned commercial.
Including a
Septic field.
Including in the case of Great Falls, that's a very important consideration, including the drain field that's serving that particular use has to be on the same lot and the same portion of the lot that's zoned to the commercial in that case. Here's a similar breakdown for these properties. It's the same type of calculation as we had previously, and I'll just go to the next slide unless someone has a question on this. Okay, now this, it's kind of good. I suppose we kept this quadrant for last because it's really, compared to the other three, as you all know, it's much different. With the Park Authority on this very large piece here, and then this being a public use with the library, really you've got just this area through here, which is commercial, and it's not even entirely zoned commercial. This piece right here is zoned residential. That's another limiting factor for how this property can be developed. Down here, this is zone C2, so you can put an office and a few other uses that are permitted in the C2 district on that lot. But here you see the numbers, they're a little bit different because the multiplier that gets you to the gross floor area by right is, in many of these cases, represents a smaller multiplier in terms of the ratio of the floor area to the area of the lot. So you can see 9818 is in fact the library. No, that's the Grange. And so you've got this building and another small building here on this property, and it's a small piece. But if you wanted to redevelop here, you have to be mindful of the comprehensive plan and the zoning ordinance. Those are all going to be restrictive. Okay. Now that I've cautioned you about these numbers all along, I'll do it again. Here's the composite total for the entire area that we looked at. You've got over 2 million square feet of area in the study area. Currently built, you've got over 318,000 square feet. And then, again, potential by right, this number represents something that's basically theoretical. And I wouldn't want anyone, and I say this as trying to be as informative and as helpful as possible. I wouldn't want anyone walking away thinking that this number is a realistic top-end development for the commercial area. And here's why. Let's go to the next slide. All these little buggers are going to get in the way of any development on any site. You've got to look at the parcel size and its configuration. The configuration of the lot by itself can be extremely limiting. Just talk to any design engineer that tries to develop one of these properties for a client. Zoning requirements, you've got a very long list, and this is most of them, but there are others to be concerned about. You've got minimum yard setback requirements for the structures and uses. You've got open space requirements, parking, transitional screening, parking lot screening, and building height, as Lori mentioned. So all of these issues so far are really going to cut into what's possible on the property. Site plan considerations, boy, the list goes on there, and again, you'd have to have a civil engineer up here giving you a more detailed perspective on what is possible and what's not. But here are some of the things that a designer is going to look at. Sidewalks, trails, curb and gutters, street lights, entrances that VDOT requires certain specifications, turn lanes, site distances, additional road right-of-way, utility easements, and that list is most items, but there's probably more. Currently, the way things are now, until there is a decision to bring sanitary sewer to this area, you've got the question of viability of on-site well and septic drain field locations, which can be very restrictive on a property. You've got stormwater management issues, water quality, adequate outfall, Chesapeake Bay requirements, and then again, come back to the comprehensive plan, which provides recommendations for what can be developed under a by right scenario. But actually, no, that would apply to an application that comes in to change something either under rezoning or another zoning application, special permit, special exception. So I know there's a lot of qualifiers here. There's a lot of caveats. I think everybody in this room, in fact, I would be kind of curious myself to know an absolute number. But what we've done here is attempted to give you something of value, something that is accurately represents certainly what's built currently, but also gives you a sense of what the potential might be, with a very strong caveat that the number that we have represented in all of the handouts are purely theoretical, and they're very much subject to all of the restrictive factors that simply come into play with any development. And probably just to reiterate one more time, I think the building height is one of the most important things, and parking is always going to be another very restrictive factor. So with that, I think I'd like to open it up for some questions, and Lori is certainly going to, and Aaron can help here as well. But Glenn?
Well, the principal relationship to the issue of septic versus sewer is what change in density could occur in the absence of septic fields being used for wastewater. And that's the principal thing that is related to the decision at hand, not so much these other factors, because they apply regardless of whether we have sewer or septic. So what would be of greatest benefit to the community, I think, in this decision process is to understand how much more or what kind of change could occur if you removed any restriction on density that currently is caused by having to treat the wastewater with a septic field.
Well, as much as I'd love to give you an answer that is very, very specific and clear, I think that type of question is better suited on a site-by-site basis because of the way a lot is configured, what's there currently, and what is the drain field situation on that particular property. I'd love to say that the drain field factor alone represents a certain percentage of land that could then be translated into development. But I really can't do that because there are so many different factors that would come into play in order to come up with an accurate estimate. If we wanted to go, just as an example, go to a hypothetical property that's 1 acre in size, and it's got a building that's currently at 0.2 FAR, and it's zoned C8. By FAR alone, you've got some headroom there up to 0.5. You've got a drain field that is of a certain square foot area and a perhaps backup drain field. And the sizes of those for the use is something that the health department could educate us on, but I don't really know exactly how much area that would be. But in this theoretical situation, let's say it represents 10% of the land area of the property. Well, if you take away the drain field and the requirement that nothing be built over the drain field, then theoretically, since you've got an FAR, a current FAR of 0.2, and you've got a certain area of this drain field, which is 10% of 1 acre lot, which is 4,300 square feet, you could increase your FAR beyond the 0.2 without doubt. But once you start developing a larger building, you're looking at perhaps additional requirements that would include, certainly parking, screening. Some of these other things would come in. Designers, engineers, they get paid a lot of money to go through this whole laundry list of what ifs. And your question is difficult enough to answer just for
It was easy to ask.
Oh, it was very easy to ask, and it was a good question. It's the question that I was expecting. But for just a single 1 acre parcel of land, I've taken you through some of the theoretical aspects of it, and you still can't come up with an actual number. I can tell you, you can probably get to somewhere between 0.2 FAR and something higher than that, but not knowing the size of the drain field and the nature of the increased development, it's really, really hard to give you an answer to that.
Let me re-ask the question then.
Hey, Glenn,
Yeah.
let Ralph ask, because he's got an
All right,
example.
that's fine with me. Fine.
Okay.
I don't want to.
I'll address your question, but let me just bring up one other point of the redevelopment. Is some of the commercial buildings are older, and since they were built, there's also been some additional restrictions that were imposed on commercial development. So what you see today from an old building with some additional restrictions could theoretically be less than what you could develop. Now, in answer to Glenn's question, let's say, your estimate here for the Great Falls Shopping Center, bring that up, is the maximum use is fairly high. But the practical point of view, the Great Falls Shopping Center was built with all the restrictions that are imposed, parking, setbacks, land, all of those restrictions. And that's what was developed on that with older restrictions, and now we have newer restrictions. So, but that shopping center has its septic field on residential property. So what could we expect from that parcel, as Glenn's saying? Well, really, that's already developed through all the restrictions we have. You pull back the septic field, a certain percent of that, but it's on residential. So how much more, theoretically, is going to be built on that? You can surmise that it really, and there's some other parcels here.
Well, it's true, Ralph, it's true here
And the
because
Village Center has the same thing.
you've got a similar situation here. Right.
But I'm just saying, the Great Falls
Yep.
Shopping Center there was built with all the restrictions.
Yes.
And Mike's going to address the Village Center.
On the Village Center there that exists, the 3A2 is where our primary septic field is. That is not even owned by the association. That is owned by someone else, and that is zone R1, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
But by right, the Village Center has the right to use it until another source of drainage comes to the community. The shopping center has a secondary drain field, which actually is in the center there of the complex. So if both of those drain fields were eliminated, first of all, the commercial district really couldn't do anything with the 3A2. There possibly could be some homes, on the R1 put up there. But the other thing that's restricting our association is parking. Currently, we have an 8% parking reduction allocation allowed because we are over parked for the square footage that is currently built on the shopping center. So we couldn't build another 2 inches onto our shopping center by deleting the septic field totally. And, we're already at a height limitation. We're already, so I mean, there's already other factors in place where at least our shopping center, which is, not as big as the other shopping center is, but we're relatively close in size, we couldn't really change at all. And we handle the septic for Wachovia Bank, Bank of America, Crossroads Building, and all Village Center 5. So all those buildings there really couldn't change because they have the same restrictions where parking becomes your next big player.
So you're talking about all of these
Right.
properties are
All those properties,
served by this.
we serve by the same septic source.
So I guess what we're really trying to say is don't be deceived by the numbers, although the numbers you did are true in an ideal setting. But if we look at what we already have built now, coming off of what we have built now, realistically, it's a far jump to those ideal numbers.
We would have preferred to represent this probably somewhat differently, but frankly, there was no other way to give you, we needed to bookend this with something that was factual. The information that we provided is true, but without, I couldn't possibly have given this information to you without giving you all the qualifiers that we have given to you. And I don't disagree with anything that has just been said from Mike or from Ralph.
Just to sum it up, the guys who originally developed these properties maxed them out for the given size, pretty much.
Not exactly. And what I mean by that is it depends on how you want to develop, and there's ways of...
I'm just saying, given the situation we have here with all the various other factors, that was pretty much what they came up with when they built it.
When they built it, there was a certain formula that went into the design that said we're going to do ground surface parking versus structured parking, and we're going to do this and we're going to do that, and all those things added up to a development that, yeah, was pretty much what they could get. But if you wanted to change some of those factors, then it changes the entire equation, and you know, there was room to do something additional.
Adding to the point this gentleman made, I was involved in the Citizens Association at the time the Safeway Shopping Center was developed. Yeah. And their proposal ended up being a compromise, and they indicated that unless they had a certain size shopping center, they couldn't get the Safeway store to come to Great Falls. And basically that was the element that led us to conclude that, and we didn't want above ground parking either. I mean, we didn't want structured parking, which is elevated. So we compromised to allow some of the parking to be behind the buildings on the residential land. So it was a sort of a bargain for the community at the time, but they didn't get any extra, really, out of it. Let me rephrase the question that I originally asked. Now, essentially, the land that septic fields are on is a certain number of acres. I haven't added them all up, but the Safeway Shopping Center septic field is about 1.5 acres. The Village Center septic field is about 2 on the main one, and so those are the 2 largest septic fields, and those are the ones that are also zoned residential. So what could be done on residential there?
Well, there are certain things you can do by right. Clearly, residential is designed for houses. You can do, by special exception, you could build a church. The list is not that long. You know, community use. Can you expand on that, Lori, a little bit?
As far as what you can do by right on a residentially zoned property, and I'm talking about the R1, RE, which we have here.
Agriculture.
The list is very, as far as non-residential, the list is very short. Public use. If you start going into a public hearing process, special permit, special exception, then the list does become somewhat longer because you start adding some of the quasi-public uses such as churches, childcare centers, but it's a public hearing process. And if you go back to the plan recommendations, and the plan recommendations talk about that the special permit, special exception uses must be rigorously reviewed. And as far as trying to expand any of the commercial onto the residential areas, again, the comprehensive plan is recommending basically no. Keep the commercial areas, and that's the dividing line. So given the existing plan, given the existing zoning, that's reality talk.
I guess we don't know this from the Department of Public Works, but I guess there's a possibility that there may be some limits on what you can do on property that is a drain field. Now, I don't know if that's true or not.
The health department says you can redevelop it under their guidance.
Sure. Let me get Wayne in here for a second, and we'll go back this way.
Well, two things. This was all developed 30, almost 40 years ago. And we've already determined, through your study, determined that you've developed it roughly half the FAR. Hence half the current FAR. This whole area was down zone, the commercial down zone in 1989. And C8 went from 0.75 to 0.5 in 1989 in the down zone. My property was caught right in the middle of it. So back when this was developed, the FAR that you use now, which is current zone, is not what it was then. So if it's if it's currently developed at half the FAR, it's really developed at about a third of what was possible if you just looked at the FAR back in 1970. And I guarantee you the developers who developed that property didn't build less than they could build on that property. They've maxed it out for parking, setbacks, road frontage, ingress, egress, height, all the other things, kept it down, not from 0.5 to 0.25, which is roughly where it is now. They had the possibility of developing at 0.75.
I think it's 0.7.
And
0.7.
0.7 to 0.5. So this shows you the restrictions and all the things that you rightfully pointed out about the setbacks and all the other things that kill you when you go in and try to get development. FAR is one of the smallest factors. And Glenn's concerned about say the biggest piece is that, well, the lot 25 can't be used because it doesn't have the frontage. You have to have frontage on a public road, and that's not big enough.
25? You mean 25?
Lot 25 is where the septic field is.
Right.
No, up on the upper right. It's just off the screen where the
25.
parking is for the Safeway. You don't have the frontage on Georgetown Pike to make that a residential lot. If you go to 3A2, which could possibly be the biggest concern, which is the left side of the village center, that's residential. If one was going to try to develop that, you could only develop it in residential. That little alley that's in there now that goes between the business center and that empty field would have to be developed. VDOT would insist that be developed into a 60-foot or 70-foot wide road to service any residentials, and you couldn't subdivide or redo it into a lot. And then you have to have a 35-foot tree buffer between the C8 and the 3A. So these are the things that chew up the land. You can't just go in there and start plotting things.
Well, I mean, everything you just said is part of the list that we have.
That's what kills the development, it's not the FAR.
Well, I'd say it's a combination.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for people who have a concern about the septic fields and all of a sudden having the World Trade Center pop up or something, this conversation is very useful because you need to realize that there's very little that can be done, in particular where it's an R1. But you do have a possibility through special exception of a church. My question would be, would a community center also be a permitted use through a special exception?
Through a special exception. a community center, and I think the other use that was thrown out as something that has been considered for this general area is an assisted living facility. So both an assisted living facility and a community center would be permitted, but it would only be under a special permit approval. A special exception approval. Yes.
What if,
Glenn, I'm sorry.
no, I'm hogging the question.
I'm just wondering, what is the zoning code for areas with taller buildings? Are they called C8, or is there another code for those areas?
Generally, Lori, you might want to take this, but if you're in a planned district, let's say Tyson's, for instance, because that's where we're seeing a lot of tall buildings, either existing or proposed, and under a planned district, certain building height limitations are built into the approval of the plan for within those districts.
Some of the commercial retail districts, like the C3, C4, which is not here, they do the maximum building heights of 120 feet. But that's the high intensity office, which you see more like in Tyson's or in other places.
In the C2 that we do have here, I think that's maybe 40 feet also.
But the commercial that we have here, the maximum building height is 40 feet. And 40 feet, again, when you equate that to story, you're looking at 3, maybe 4 if you have a completely flat roof and low floor to ceiling, but that's what you're looking at.
You can get an increase if you want to go through a public hearing process, and the board would have to make a decision on an incremental increase from what either the C or the C6 or C8 district permits by right. They can increase that to a small degree upwards, but again, it's a public hearing process.
And it's subject to the company's plan recommendations.
Right, so actually it would be a change of the comp plan first, then you would go through a special exception to increase the building height limitation.
The Safeway Shopping Center is one story today. Is it, if somebody, let's suppose a long time in the future, just hypothetical, something destroyed that whole area, and a new developer came in and said, I want to put in elevated parking. What could they get out of that if they used the 40-foot height limitation to the max?
Well, again, going to the earlier question, you put a second story in and you're basically doubling this gross square footage for that new building. So keep that in mind to start with. And
I would like to add, though, that structured parking does not count toward FAR.
Or you take away the area.
Right. There's certain, when you calculate gross floor area, and I know this is getting
Deep.
pretty deep, but that structured parking does not count toward the FAR, but it does count toward height. So.
Yeah. It takes away the parking use, or some of the parking use limitation on development. If you have 2 levels or 3 levels of
Well,
parking.
what it does is, theoretically, a taller parking structure, you need less land area
Right.
to accommodate the
yeah,
setback.
potentially gives you
But-
more area to develop with structured parking.
But having said that, though, structured parking is many, many times more expensive to build, and then there's the economics of it as to whether or not is it economically feasible for a Safeway of a certain size to have structured parking.
Yeah, I mean, Glenn's question is, if you just added a story to all of the existing buildings, for example, and under the current footprint in that shopping center, is that you'd have enough, quote, FAR to do that, but you run into all these other problems
You would have to
Increase your
parking
parking
and
parking
traffic and everything else
Right.
that would create, even though it's not a public hearing process at that point, it's administrative, you'd still have to go through all those hoops, and you couldn't get through them because you wouldn't be able to do it.
What about putting a second level of living facilities on top of the Safeway Shopping Center buildings and using the residential land where the septic field is for parking for those residential uses.
You can't build residential in the commercial district. Now, what you're talking about, no. The Safeway is in a C6.
I was born over my dad's meat market, so I had heard.
Well, I suspect and you know, ironically, you know, a generation or two from now, they're going to be born over a meat market too, probably. Yeah. Because if you start looking at trends in planning, you're seeing that exact type of development where you've got mixed use. You've got, I mean, if you wanted to take all of downtown Great Falls and start from scratch, I'll tell you that you could come up with some incredibly ingenious, creative, and functionally good developments that everybody would love. But to get to a blank piece of paper at this point, and that's not what we're here to talk about tonight, nor is it probably something that's ever going to happen.
Well, I would like to point out, though, that in commercial, you can't have a caretaker like one resident.
But he was talking about more than a caretaker.
But if you're talking about...
That's a P district, Glenn.
No, that's in a...
No, I'm saying what he was proposing is a P district. It's a P district concept to have mixed use.
Mixed use, that's really the...
Yeah, and I think, you know, your vision says maybe that would be a nice thing for that piece of property.
Well, it isn't, it's just that we've heard it said.
Yeah.
In discussions.
Some people would like to get out of bed and go down and get their coffee and shop and say hello to people on the benches around town.
Well, that's one of the very ideas that came up during our community brainstorming session.
Yeah.
So just to recap, that would require then a complete whole rezoning process.
Oh yeah.
All through the.
We're getting. In fact, what I meant to do earlier was to just say there's certain limitations to the scope of what we want to discuss, and now that Glenn's raised this conceptual idea, it really does go into way beyond what we are here to talk about, which that would involve a rezoning to a P district that allows for mixed use. That's really about 2 steps removed from what we've been talking about tonight.
So what, I'm not sure I understand. I think I've got the first 2 shopping centers, but what about that 7-Eleven? What can we do up there if we have a suit?
Okay. You're talking about this property? No. This property here.
Right.
What do you mean, what could you do?
I mean, how much property, what could we do different than what we already have?
That property is challenged. And what I mean by that is...
It's got a front yard here, a front yard there.
Yeah,
those are setback requirements.
Setbacks and...
Remember we said configuration of lot is a factor. This is a good example of lot configuration that's limiting. What you've got there developed now, if you wanted to just tear it all down and redevelop it, you could do something a little more than what's there, but nothing huge. It just wouldn't allow for a huge building.
I would like to point out that by using that particular requirement, parcel 4 by itself is challenged, but if you start putting several of those lots together, where you have more land area, and that gives you a little bit more flexibility, a little bit more opportunity to meet some of those requirements. But I also know when you're dealing with different property owners and different interests, again, that's not necessarily, it's theoretically possible, but it's maybe not realistic.
Yeah, that's the concept that Lori's just talked about is one of the burning issues for Tyson's, because now that you've got all this potential there, the question is, this little guy here, can he join hands with 2 or 3 properties next door so they can really do something serious or big?
What could be done on 11A?
181.
1A, right there. What
This
could
lot?
be done?
Okay, well, I think Ralph maybe could speak to that.
What are your plans?
No, I want to hear the county say what could be
I
done.
want to raise the story and let an apartment over here.
Yeah, it's gonna have a butcher shop.
With his meat cleaver.
Over the drills.
New dentist in town.
That property is, that's, I believe that's all C8, is that right? Ralph, or is it, no, that's C8, isn't it? Let me go back to my zoning page.
It's not the same.
It's zoned C8.
C8, okay.
Yeah. So you could build anything by right that's allowed in the C8 district, and then you got to start looking at all those site restrictions. But you know, it's to me that's another tough question. You're 40 feet. You couldn't build above 40 feet. You couldn't build beyond 0.5 FAR, and given the yard situation here, this is another lot that's not perfect because you got a large setback here and you have a large setback there. You're limited again.
This is where, all due respect to you, when Jack proposed an increase like twice the size, maximum building. I mean, back in the day, I built the max that I could. I sincerely doubt if I could build the size of that. Not even that.
Yeah, but if there were a sewer, obviously there would be a sewage disposal issue. So certain types of establishments that might not be here now might be able to commit. So I just wondered from a zoning perspective, how would the potentially nature of the Great Falls area change from the zoning perspective without any changes in density, just what we have now? Could everything become a restaurant, everything become a nail salon, everything become a fast food restaurant? I mean, things that aren't here very much now, could they become all those things easily under zoning?
Well, I was hoping this question didn't come up because there seems to be some debate about whether fast food restaurants, under what was the board approved for this development, there was a condition that was hard, to my understanding, and I'm going to lay this out as it needs to be interpreted beyond what I say here because I don't know for a fact. But there are conditions that were stated in a letter from the developer to the Great Falls Civic Association that said, we're going to do this, 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 and this. And the board took that document and they made that part of their approval. And on the list of things, it said, no fast food restaurants. So you gotta consider that when you answer your question. But just purely in terms of the drain field issue going away and allow, having water and sewer there, it does enable, I would think, more development of higher intensity uses that use water more. Restaurant would be an example. But again, you need to caveat that by are there restrictions as far as fast food restaurants? In terms of other restaurants and other locations, there's a fair amount of restaurants in that general area to begin with, but I think theoretically you could see more uses that require more water use.
My follow-up question would be though, is that, how much does your office control the establishment of those types of facilities?
Our office, in addition to watching what the zoning ordinance requires, is mindful of anything that is in place that's more restrictive, including a proffer condition or development condition that limits the development on a property beyond what the zoning ordinance says within the district, say the C6 or C8. So our office, if I hear your question correctly, we would look at anything that the board has approved that would control or restrict development on that property, and it would start with the zoning ordinance.
And I would also like to add, many of those types of uses that I think might potentially be considered like car washes or
Special exceptions.
a special exception. And again, I'm going back to Aaron and his comprehensive plan, which they have to be rigorously reviewed, and that's a whole other element of public hearing process, and there's no guarantee that application may be successful.
I think your turn is next. I think we're getting close to wrapping up here. But,
My question is, where do you start counting 40 feet?
well, you mean as far as the setback requirement or the height?
In terms of the height, where do you start counting to 40 feet?
Average grade?
You take in every, is it every 5-foot increment or at certain?
The reason why I'm asking this is there's two houses on Walker Road that kind of built a basement and then built a hill and then counted the...
I bet they did that. They did that before 2007.
Right. They changed how they define where you measure the height from for residential property.
Yeah, the board adopted a regulation that says you've got to measure from the pre-existing grade level.
Right.
It kind of eliminated, as Wayne cringes in the back row, it eliminated the option of the developer coming in and building up the grade and then having the height measurement from that new grade. Okay, Wayne, I'll let you.
Jack, I think, having been in meetings like this for 10 years, the question I think that was asked is there's a lot of misgivings on the mysteries of the zoning, and there's a lot of misconception that the zoning changes when sewer comes. And I think that was really the source of the question down here, is that, oh, now you can do different things. The zoning looks at it, they don't care about sewer or septic. That's the health department and public works and other people. If you're zoned C8 and you can put a nursery in there, whether it's septic field or sewer or water or well, it's not impacted by zoning. The zoning, you go to the zoning regs on the website and you look up the things you can do. No mention anywhere in zoning does it say that it changes if you're septic field or sewer. So there's not going to be new zoning stuff permitted when that changes. And that's been a misconception over the past.
Well, everything you just said is absolutely true, but that's not exactly the way I understood the question. I think the question was a little bit different.
Is that I think that all of a sudden you can put an 8-story building in if you got sewer. It's restricted by zoning, not the sewer.
Right. I think that general idea is understood.
But it is impacted by the site plans, right?
Well, now I have two questions. But when does something like an area become developed differently or advancing? When does zoning get reviewed and changed by the official?
Okay, I don't fully understand the question.
Well,
when you say the zoning gets changed.
If we went back to 1910, this probably wasn't zoned the way it is.
It wasn't zoned at all.
Right, okay. So things change over time, right? And sometimes zoning changes. What are the factors that say, okay, we're gonna relook at this area or relook at the whole county and change them?
I think that starts with Aaron in terms of, you know, a community looking to see whether they want to change the zoning. If you're looking at, you know, an area versus a parcel, somebody can come into the county and propose to rezone if it's within the guidelines of the comprehensive plan. If it goes beyond that, then they have to, the comprehensive plan needs to be changed before they can bring the proposal to rezone the property. But if they're within the recommendations, the limitations of the comprehensive plan, then they simply bring a rezoning application to the county for review, and that goes through a public hearing process with the Planning Commission and finally with the Board of Supervisors.
I got the impression the comprehensive plan was more of a suggestion than a dictate, because of the cuts of the roads and
The comprehensive plan is technically just a guide, whereas the zoning ordinance is a regulatory document.
So you really don't have to change the guide, right? You
But
have to consider the
But what the comprehensive plan says is these are guidelines that are looked at very carefully by both the Planning Commission and the board in any decisions they might make on a property.
What the zoning ordinance also says, though, particularly to a special permit, special exceptions, rezoning, we look to the comprehensive plan in terms of those approvals. And so that's the link right there.
And then I guess my second question was about enforcement, which perked my attention when you said, you know, you had something that was already filed when this was originally developed, no fast food. But we have a Subway. Is that not on the same piece of property? And how did that happen? That we get a Subway in a place where there's no fast food? Is that not fast food?
It's good food fast.
How many do it drive?
Yeah, I think a lot of people were concerned about drive-throughs or drive-through windows for like a McDonald's. I think that was what people had in mind, and that would require a special exception if you wanted to do that today. Anyway, so but I think that's what they had in mind when they were thinking about that.
Now, Lori, a Subway sandwich shop, there's some sit down, but it's mostly carry out, so I think that would be fast food versus eating a
Under your
sandwich.
definition.
We would probably view it as fast food, given the way fast food is defined in the zoning ordinance.
So that goes back to, so how is it really enforced? If there's something there that said no fast food, and yet we have fast food, how did that happen?
I think when that came in, it was viewed as by right. The zoning permitted a use of fast food restaurant that didn't have a drive-through.
Certain fast food is permitted by right if you're in a shopping center and there's certain
Other types of
limitations in terms of square footage and how many people under the same roof. So it's possible that you just go to zoning regulations. Now, in that particular case, I know that it is subject to special exception, and it makes reference to a letter. I read through some of this documentation, and quite frankly, just as a lay reader who wasn't part of those original discussions, that's not easy reading. I mean, it's very difficult to understand and interpret what's really going on. So.
Well, I was here at the time.
Coffee shop. They follow the coffee shop. They follow the next to the coffee shop. They're doing the equivalent thing.
I'm gathering from this discussion, this is a query, that it's not just the FAR that distinguishes different zoning codes, but it's uses. So C8 allows more uses than C6.
Correct.
So specifically, what C8 uses that are not allowed in C6 do you think getting rid of septic and bringing sewer would enable?
Well, I don't have a full list of uses allowed in the CA district. We probably should have brought a copy of those districts from the zoning ordinance. But Lori, can you think of something off the top of your head where you can do in C8 that maybe with it?
Obviously, there's a slightly higher FAR. There's one use that popped into my head. For example, a contractor's office and shop is permitted in C8. It's not permitted in C6. That's permitted by right use. So there are a couple of uses which are allowed in the C8 district by right, which aren't allowed under any circumstances in C6.
You could have a regional shopping center.
which means Best Buy.
C6 is a community retail.
Retail.
CA is highway commercial.
So is it fair for me to conclude that the current zoning is not in conformity with the comprehensive plan, or it's not consistent with the comprehensive plan?
No, it is.
No, it's not, because the comprehensive plan, as you pointed out, talks about neighborhood serving uses, which is more in terms of the C5 zoning than it is C8.
And I think historically, if you look at the zoning in this area, I'm pretty sure this is one of those areas back in 1941, when zoning first came to the county. There were some commercial nodes which were established, and I believe this happens to be one of those commercial nodes.
They did that 200 yards.
And then they had a certain distance from the intersection is commercial, everything else around it is residential. And then in 1959, we had another zoning ordinance that was adopted. In 1978, we had the current zoning ordinance. And then as with each iteration, the property was rezoned to the then existing zoning district. So there's been somewhat of an evolution of zoning. And that kind of explains how we have this lack of commercial and it's amongst the sea of residential.
And it's quite possible that the comprehensive
And
plan.
that's prior to any comprehensive plan, which didn't come into existence until the mid-70s.
Exactly.
I'm fearful at this point that we're starting to introduce concepts and things that might even begin to confuse you more than clarify. Yeah, so
Yes.
maybe it's time to wrap up. Unless are there any final questions that we really need to address before we head out? I think our purpose was to give you a broad overview and some reasonable expectation of what could be built with a lot of qualifications. And if you walk away with that message, then I think we've given you what you're looking for. But I'm thankful we had this period where we could answer a bunch of questions, because I think that got to some of the more important details. And I also want to suggest that if something comes to mind later that we haven't discussed tonight, feel free to contact me or Lori or Aaron, and we'll follow up on any questions. I think we might get some more information from some of the business owners that might do a little bit of an exercise to see, using the professionals that are needed to do a site analysis to see what kind of additional development could go on some of these properties. And we've told them that we'd be happy to take a look at that. And if that's something that someone else wants to be aware of, we'll pass that along.
Well, I have a plan to prepare a white paper that is trying to present this in a simple way. And I find it very difficult, given what you have presented, notwithstanding that the complex truth is always gray. One thing, however, that seems clear is that the uses could change to more restaurants, for example, if a sewer line was put in. Is that unequivocal?
It's limited by parking.
Right.
Well, of course, but the uses could change, but not necessarily that wouldn't change the density.
Well, there's going to be market factors at play as well. I mean,
of course.
Obviously, it's not going to be profitable to have 100 restaurants in the area, but I think the basic idea that you've suggested is probably true, simply because of the sewer water situation changing. That would perhaps enable some additional restaurant development in the area. I think that's a fair expectation.
Restaurants have a very high parking rate relative to other retail uses because it's based on the number of seats.
Right. And you've heard the comments about the village center site where they're maxed out parking-wise.
Well, I may follow up because I need some professional help to do a paper that will put this in a manner that the greater community be able to,
No, I can appreciate that. In fact,
will want to.
yeah, I attended the presentation by the Public Works Department on the various possibilities with the sewer lines. I think the whole program that you've organized is exceptional, and I think a great service to the community. And to summarize it and put it into a document that is easily understood by everyone in a brief summary form, I think that's an excellent idea. We're absolutely willing to help in trying to translate some of the stuff we did into a package that can, that can be used that summarizes the whole thing that we presented.
I will offer that the wastewater committee will send you several questions that we want a simple answer to as possible.
There is a simple answer to zoning.
I understand. As possible. Okay?
No, it's coming in gray paper.
Right.
We do that routinely. Every day we get questions that are quite a range.
And we would like to be recipient, the Citizens Association would like to be recipient of any information you provide to the business people, as we've been sharing both ways.
Actually, we're not going to present anything further unless they ask us for additional information. My understanding is they may wish to do an exercise where they look at certain properties and have a professional engineer that does site development take a look and do some rough calculations as to what could be done. Perhaps, one or two properties would serve as a good example for everyone to understand what the potential is. It's going to be different than what the numbers are here, but I tried to explain we're not engineers. That's not our business to break down a property and tell you exactly what you can and can't do on it. We just gave you the parameters as they relate to the regulations that we do have authority over.
See, that would be good if you had examples that started to take those factors into account on specific sites that everybody's familiar with. It could give them a better feel for exactly what's feasible and not.
Right. Which parcels have you?
We haven't done anything.
We just met with Jack. Jack, I want to thank him. Business committee met an hour before, and we discussed a lot of different things, but right now we're formulating. We haven't done it.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Oh, I want to thank you for your presentation. I made sure that we have a digital copy to put on our website.
I've given that to Glenn. He's got a.
Thank you all. We really appreciate it. As you know, it's an important issue.
I set it down.